My name is Brian Wood, Medical Director for the Mountain West AETC ECHO. Welcome to this week's session, and I will turn it over to today's speaker.
My pleasure. It's nice to see some of you again. I remember some of you from the last time I was here. So, this is a topic that's incredibly important to us, but it's also incredibly important to patients. And so there is a stigma that's essentially what we're talking about is prognosis. And, prognosis and communicating prognosis is something for which we get very little training about. And it's often perceived that it's bad news and people don't want to hear it. And really what we have is the evidence shows that people do want to know about their prognosis and they do want to have these discussions, and it's often hard to bring it up. But if you think about prognosis, we do it all the time. Well, I have a cold. How long do we think this cold is going to last? Well, about 10 days if it runs its course. And so you really talked about prognosis. And we know that the more comfortable you are in talking about things such as anything that might be perceived as bad news, prognosis or otherwise, the more comfortable they're going to be. And so I appropriately titled my talk that Talking About Death Won't Kill You. It's actually a book by that name. And it doesn't kill them either. So I just want to spend just a little bit of time talking about some core information and then really kind of defer to Brian and open it up from there. So you really want to kind of set the tone and the expectations of what's going to go on. And normally you've had some kind of a relationship with folks before you have this discussion, at least in the outpatient setting. Now, in the inpatient, in the hospital setting, that's a little different. You often find yourself perhaps not knowing the person, and the inpatient colleagues are really trying to establish some kind of an alliance. But ideally, unless this person is really new to you, you already have some type of a relationship or an alliance. Know that this topic can be frightening to people. That doesn't mean they don't want to not talk about it. And it's also confusing because oftentimes when you say prognosis, people are thinking about death, right? Because we don't think of prognosis in anything other than what's the prognosis? It's either good, bad, poor. And so they don't think of it in terms of just this is a prediction of what we think things will come to the best of our ability to predict. And so part of this is you really want to kind of get a sense. So you make this kind of introduction, and then you want to get a sense of how they're responding, and look at their affect. Are they making eye contact with you? Ideally, again, you have a relationship with them, so you get a good sense of how they're reading this. If it's a long-term person, you might also have a sense of how well they cope or don't cope. Sometimes the folks that I take care of that have a substance abuse history sometimes don't cope well. They have a blunted kind of coping response, and so it's hard for them to hear things. Or more importantly, it may be hard for them to process what they've heard. So, once you've kind of fired that warning shot, so it's called, and kind of let them know what it is you want to talk about, you kind of take a step back and see how they respond. And silence is not a bad thing here on anyone's part, but specifically on our part. And we know that there's a tendency to want to break that silence with talking. And healthcare providers do that a lot because we get uncomfortable with it. It's kind of like when someone starts to cry, we immediately shove a Kleenex box at them, which we feel is very supportive, but in reality, it's kind of like, please help, stop doing this, stop, don't cry. It makes us all uncomfortable. So it's okay if they wipe their tears with their hands and don't have a Kleenex box. So if you're sharing information and it's not really about making any decisions, let them know that. Again, in the hospital setting where the crisis level is a little higher, then it may be more about we need to make some decisions today. But ideally in the outpatient world, you want to be able to say, we're going to have this discussion today. We're not going to make any decisions about what we're doing, but really I want to give you some things to think about so that we can continue to have this discussion. So the least threatening you can make it, the better it's going to be. And we really want it to be not perceived as a threatening, or if it is initially, to kind of de-escalate what we're going to be doing. And you normalize it. And when we talk about that, I'll talk to you about how I normalize these types of conversations. So, the first thing you really want to know is what's their understanding of what's going on. And there are a number of ways you can do this. Sometimes you're talking to family members, oftentimes you're talking to family members and patients, or sometimes just patients. But, one sentence, one phrase is, as you kind of see things, as you kind of understand things, what do you believe to be your major concern medically today? That's one way to do it. More recently, I've started using the question of just saying, how do you see your situation today? And that question's much broader, and it really gives me interesting responses. Some people will kind of look at you and say, situation? What do you mean my situation today? But others, it's so interesting where if you say, how do you see your situation today? And they respond with, the traffic was horrible and I'm really frustrated by the traffic. Well, that doesn't really help you with their medical knowledge, but it certainly helps you understand where they are and what their priority is. And their priority may be something that's totally different from yours. So I've really kind of started using that and incorporating that and moved away from, tell me your understanding of your medical condition or the medical information. Another one is, how serious do you see your situation? Very interesting, insightful, as to people may actually say, I don't know, you're asking me to talk about this, and it must be serious, in which you can then deliver information. Or other people say, no, it's fine. I'm doing great. I feel really well, and I don't think it's serious at all. The point being, you won't know unless you ask them, and you really want to know their perception of what it is. So, and then another way you can phrase that too is really, what's most important to you right now? What's most important to you in terms of life? What's most important to you in terms of the treatment we're going to be giving you? And again, many different answers come to that, from, I don't know how I'm going to pay for a ride home. I've had that response, like, I use access transportation to get here, and I have no idea how I'm going to get back to my place today. And that was an overriding kind of what's most important to them. To cost of medication, lots of different things, and you want to be able to know. You also want to know them really on a personal level, and that's more than, do you smoke? Have you smoked in the past? Do you use drugs? Have you used drugs in the past? Are you sexually active? This is more about who they are as a person and what's important to them. And the part of that is building an alliance, but the other part of that is really getting to know them as a human, and because knowing them as a human helps guide them in their decision making and what's important to them. I always make it a point, if they have kids, to write down their kids' names, because I'll never remember it the next time I see them. If they have a spouse, if they have a partner, I write down that person's name, certain details about what they've done in the past, what gives their life meaning and purpose. Those kinds of things are really important to them. What's not as important to them that's important to us is, have you smoked in the past? Have you, those kinds of things, that's more our need than theirs. So really getting to know them on a personal level helps also with you and how you deliver your information. And then you never ever want to not ask about faith, religion, or spirituality. Many times, if it means nothing to someone, that's very important, because the last thing you want to do is say, have you talked to anybody in your church community, or have you talked to anybody? And they're an atheist, right? That would be offensive to them. The other piece is that some people draw a lot of strength from that, and it's really important to them, and you wouldn't want to overstep that. So one way of clarifying that is, where do you get your strength from? Where do you see as your major source of support? That's one way of asking the religion and spirituality. Another way is just to more directly say, are you affiliated with any type of spiritual or religious organization that's important to you? A lot of times you'll hear, well, I was raised Catholic, but I don't go anymore, or I'm very spiritual. Other people will talk about their church. So again, something you won't know unless you ask, but many people make medical decisions based on their faith and religion, or lack thereof, than they do on medical information. So if you're incredibly ill and you have an understanding that you have a condition from which you're not going to survive and things are getting worse, and you still want everything done, sometimes if you sort through there, it's about a fear of the unknown. What's going to happen to me when I die? I have no idea what's going to happen to me when I die. Or I'm worried it's something bad, really bad, some hot, warm place somewhere that has a lot of fire. Right? And so those are the kinds of things really you want to sort through how they're making decisions. And religion and spirituality can often play a role in that. So hopes, fears, concerns, really important. Tell me what you're hoping for at this point. Ask it, let it be. See where they come with that. Again, it can be as simple as, I'm hoping that I'm not throwing up tonight, to it's hoping I live to see X, and that gives you a perspective that I want to be 100, and they're 50, and incredibly frail with multimorbidity. Just don't know. And again, what are your biggest concerns? Well, I don't have any concerns. Is there anything you're worried about in particular, about your health, about your family? You kind of have to dig a little bit through that. And then the other way I do that is, as the person taking care of you, involved in your care, is there anything particular you're hoping for that I should know about or other people should know about? And I make sure I write that down, because it's otherwise the next time I see them, I may say, now you were hoping for this, or you had these concerns. How are we with those? How are those with that coming on? Again, it makes it human. I won't remember them, so I have to write them down. Sometimes I remember them, depending on what they tell me they're hoping for. But really important, because again, it's going to help you drive this decision making, if there is, and or the conversation about prognosis, right? So if they say, I'm just hoping to be alive, well, tell me what that means. Does that mean just breathing and being on a ventilator, or does that mean something else? Really helps you understand that. All right, so we really want to clarify goals. You really shouldn't have a conversation about prognosis and or future unless you already first have talked to them about their goals, because otherwise it's just a talk about numbers and statistics. This many percentage, this, we see when you take this medication, this percentage of, and that's not always helpful. You've got to personalize it. So personalizing it is understanding their situation, where do they live, who's important to them, what are they hoping for, what are they afraid of, and then really kind of gearing in their medical condition to who they are as a person. Remembering they're a person first, and then they're a person with a medical condition after that. And based on that, you then make you reflect back, tell me what this means, let's sort through that, and you can make recommendations. And that's where if someone says, what's most important to me is that I be independent, a lot of times you'll hear, I never want to live in a nursing home, I never want to have anybody clean me up, lots of things that changes by race and gender and age. And so they say, no, I'd never want to be independent, or I'd never want to be dependent on others. I want to live in my own home. If I can't live in my own home, then it wouldn't be okay. And I have advanced COPD and heart failure, even though my HIV is controlled. And I'd want to be fully resuscitated. I want to have CPR at the time of my death, and I want to be on a ventilator. Well, those procedures may not be in sync with, I never want to live in a nursing home. I want to be able to live independently. Anything less than that would be death. So then you can make some recommendations based on, based on what you've told me and I know about you, I would recommend you choose this, and recommend considering not choosing this. I always go with what we can do and what we should do versus what we shouldn't do to build that kind of alliance. So that's the short kind of version of how I launch into and have these discussions.